Hey all, welcome to the channel. I'm Task Force Bourbon. We just worked through a little bit of technical difficulties, but what we're going to be doing tonight is a comparison video of Dettling 1867 small batch and their cask strength single barrel. So it is an Alabama style bourbon, and that term Alabama style is really reserved for a company that uses the brand name Clyde Mays out of Conecuh Ridge Whiskey, but we'll get into that in a little bit. So this brand is actually has one more expression, a bottle and bond, which of course is a 4-year 100 proof offering that was recently released. But I don't have that here tonight. So what we're going to be doing is a side by side between these two, and then talking a little bit about, as a preamble, what Alabama style really means. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and dive right in to talk a little bit about the Clyde Mays brand. So like I said, it's from Conecuh Ridge Whiskey. It's a type of whiskey produced and officially marketed as Clyde Mays Alabama style whiskey by that distillery. It's marketed as a high quality aged moonshine whiskey, which was produced illegally in Alabama during the mid to late 20th century. Clyde Mays, a person, he used spring water from southern Alabama and added oven-dried apples to his barrels. The resulting hints of green apple and cinnamon not only made it smoother than other whiskeys, they're what made it, quote, Alabama style. That brand was legalized by the moonshiner's son, Kenny May, in 2001, and then the company built their name around that popular Alabama style whiskey, a term that they coined and trademarked, which is essentially a traditional bourbon that has oven-dried apples added to the barrel full of new make. That bourbon that they're producing is sourced from Indiana, undisclosed, but we know that means MGP. And in 2004, that whiskey style was designated the official state spirit of Alabama by legislative resolution. So that's why we got to talk a little bit about that, because this has the distinction, this brand, Dettling, of being the first straight bourbon whiskey, the first bottle and bond, and the first grain to grass, or the term they're using is field to bottle, Alabama grown bourbon. So they are really the first bourbon in Alabama, right? That's solely from that state. So while another brand houses that, holds that that name, sake for the state spirit, as it were, they are truly the Alabama offering. And so moving in a little bit about this, Dettling, FX Dettling, was founded in 1867 by Franz Xavier Dettling in Brunnen, Switzerland. For over 150 years, the Dettling distillery remained in operation at the original location, and it producing the most award Kirsch in the world. I believe that's like a cherry brandy. Big Escambia Spirits was founded in early 2014 by Seth and Vicky Dettling, and is located in the woods of Big Escambia Creek, Atmore, Alabama. It's about 10 miles north as the bird flies from the state line of Florida. Big Escambia Spirits licensed the Dettling trademark for whiskey and became the first, like we talked about, field to bottle bourbon, the first straight bourbon whiskey, and the first bottle and bond bourbon made in Alabama. But that's really not what makes this unique. So if you're tuning in and you're interested in this, you've probably seen this mentioned, the cask strength single barrel by Fred Minnick, where he's is known for someone who has a taste for the premium. When you look at the Russell Reserve 13, he named that as his whiskey of the year, was it 2021, and from there it got unobtainable. Not saying we blame him, but he definitely didn't help in that front. But he loved this offering, and so this became sort of hard to find too. And I was in Alabama recently for a visit, and I could see this all day long. I picked up the small batch, but I couldn't find this, and obviously I eventually did after much hunting. And so what really drew my attention wasn't that, right? Because, like I said, this was the first thing I picked up, and it's an 80 proof. That's low. That's the lowest legally, able to be, still be able to call bourbon. And it's aged for only 30 months. So those, math wizards in the crowd, that's 2.5 years. So that's not very long. For instance, a bottle and bond is 4 years minimum, and that's for me where I say a bourbon starts. Even though technically speaking, it could be 1 second in the new charred oak container and be called bourbon, as long as it meets all the other stuff. But as far as age statements go, now being 30 months or a straight bourbon, meaning it has to be at least aged 2 years to get that, that name straight. But really what drew my attention was this is a 6 grain. You see it very, very small print. I doubt you could even see it. Yeah, I can barely see it, and I'm here in person. But down to the very bottom, it's 6 grains. That is wild for a bourbon, and even wild for a whiskey. So most bourbons will use 3 grains. They'll use corn, obviously 51% or more to be bourbon. The secondary grain, being the flavoring grain, is usually rye or less than common, but still probably the next in line would be wheat. So you got corn, rye or wheat, and then barley. Now the flavoring grain, the rye and the wheat, when you add all 4 of those, you get a 4 grain, and that is considered special. So you see things like E.H. Taylor out of Buffalo Trace has a 4 grain offering, goes for big money on the secondary. But other offerings, there are other brands that are doing 4 grains, and it's a hard thing to balance when you start mixing in the rye and the wheat. Those are 2 very opposing flavor notes, with the rye having that really spice forward sort of kicks. And then you've got the wheat being a softer, more gentler profile, very something more subtle. And that's actually what it was, used for initially by Weller back in the day. But, so for somebody to do 5, 6 grains, that's, mind blowing. And that drew me in right away. A 6 grain bourbon, less than 2 years, and then 80 proof. This one, obviously, cask strength. And for this, that means 107.2 proof. Drawing the attention of someone with a refined palate, I'm curious. And so that's what really drew me in. And then I started doing a little bit of research and, looking to find out a little bit more about these grains. And I've got some quotes here from Biggest Scamby Spirits and Seth Dettling, the master distiller and owner, who says, quote, "The heart of any bourbon is corn. It is paramount to have great corn as the starting point. We are fortunate to be located in the extreme southern corn belt, where our climate and soils being ideal for this task. However, their flavor comes from, quote, the beer and baking world, from that unique 6 grain mash bill." Seth says the mash bill is 70% corn, but it's really bready corn, so he wanted to layer on deeper flavors onto it. 15% rye, sourced from Canada, because they grow the best in his opinion. 12% oats, which give it that nice creamy mouthfeel and extends the finish, according to him. 3% roasted malts, which he goes on to say it's a very small percentage, but it has a big impact, so you have to be very, very sparing with it. Those malts include a Chilean medium roasted barley, a dark roast malted barley from Germany, and a medium roast malted wheat from Germany. That's really what stands out, right, in the flavor of these offerings. Now, he goes on to comment that, quote, "It's a very complex recipe, but the best beer grains in the world really are coming from Germany. So it makes sense. If I wanted to make oatmeal stout, I would go to Germany and buy those grains. So for me, it made total sense, and I got the flavor I was looking for." So he was looking for a certain thing and sourced from the best, he knew of. And really that's, what we get in these products. All right, so their cask strength, like I said, is a single barrel, and it was picked by him. It's 24 months and 107.2 proof, small batch. There's no legal definition for what a small batch is. It's relative to the size of the distillery, but I do imagine that the small batch is in fact probably small. When you look at companies like Jim Beam, for example, that could mean like 200 barrels, but you go to something like this, it could mean 2 to 10, 12, 20, at the high end. But so probably means actually small, and they do that so they can maintain the consistency of this brand. So what I'm tasting here will probably taste like what you buy a year or 2 from now, unless they change the age or something like that. But this one, the single barrel, is going to change its flavor profile, so that might vary, and that's really going to be, the master distiller is going to have to control that product. Now, Clyde Mays, had made comments in the past that says, Alabama, because of the extreme, heat and the climate, which, if you've never been to Alabama, trust me, hot. They had made a remark to the fact that every year is like 2 years in a barrel as compared to like somewhere like Kentucky. I don't know if that's true. I think the spirits do something different when it holds in the outsides, but then they do get really cold. So maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it all works out to be the same. It definitely has an impact. So there is a difference when you look at the Kentucky belt or the bourbon belt, like Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee. So I'm going to start first with the small batch and talk a little bit about it. This, as you can see, it's very light bodied. It's 80 proof. You know, when you look at other 80 proof offerings like Basil Hayden, you know, it too has a very light body. I'm not the nosing wizard. I like to think my palate's a little better than my nose, but I mean, right up front, you get all the grains. It's so grainy. In fact, other times you smell something like this, it would suggest the youth on it. I know obviously it's been open, so I know that's not exactly the case. And I've smelled something like this in the past when I've had like the Jim Beam signature line that they did the experimental stuff. They did like a 6 grain, or not 6 grain, but six row barley, I think it was. They've done, you know, red winter wheat, oats, for example. So I've smelled this before on some of those. But it smells warm. Does that make sense? I don't know. Whatever, let's taste it. So 80 proof is something really hard to be imbalanced because it's so low proof. Everything's kind of muted. I do think that this is balanced in a very weird way because those grains are all spiking all over the place, but at the end, it kind of all works together. They complement one another. And it is rye in that barley forward. You do get those kind of right off the bat. But there's this super awesome note I'm calling like an almond joy, which, you know, for those that don't know, that's a, you know, chocolate coconut almond, obviously candy bar. And it reminds me a lot of that, you know, right at the coconut and chocolate kind of centerpiece there. And it sweetens the palate. I remember the first time I had this, which just a day ago or 2 days ago, and you know, I was actually searching for this guy like to talk about, but when I had him, I was very pleased that, you know, I'm able to taste something very unique, and it's kind of surprising to hear like something, you know, potentially good coming out of Alabama for bourbon. You know, that's not to say they don't have the means to do it or anything to that effect. What I suggest is, you know, that we typically in the bourbon community defer to Kentucky or maybe Indiana, maybe Tennessee as like the gold standard, and nothing can be good if it's not from there. And this is just not the case. This is a great example of that not being the case. And that almond joy, and I would say obviously coconut is one of those flavors that some people hate, right? And it's like, oh, you lost me. I wouldn't say that's true for this. While that's what I'm interpreting, you might interpret that note as something a little bit different. But that, you know, mixture of the chocolate with that, it really, I was like, wow, I wonder if this is going to ramp that up the cask strength. And I'm going to hunt now because I am super curious. But let's try the mid. So you get more of that sweetness. It goes from that chocolate more into the corn. So it goes, but it's more of that milled. It's very grainy. You get some oats. Him talking about extending that finish. I don't know if they put that in my mind or whatever, but that those oats are kind of very soft. I think of like steel cut, you know, kind of raw oats, you know, before they're made. And then the finish just kind of lingers on all those grains. You get a light almond, you know, kind of a raw almond. Again, there's a lot of flavor for such a low proof. 80 proofs tend to be very hard for you know, to get that flavor. That's why you see, I think, you know, things like Basil Hayden having experimental lines, like their toast, like their subtle smoke, like their 10-year age stated bourbons, you know, which is like, for me, I look to that as sort of the gold standard of 80 proof bourbons, and I think those offerings I just mentioned are an attempt to, you know, reach into flavor for something such a low proof, and this is just hitting it right out the gate, not having anything extra really other than just the grains, the mash bill, the recipe. So let's go ahead and pour ourselves here a splash, a dram of Cask Strength Single Barrel. Okay. Well, right up front here, Cask Strength Small Batch. You can already see, I'm sure, how much darker it is. But what's weird, this is 6 months less than the small batch. 24 months, 2 years, compared to 2.5 years at 30 months. Wow. And it's darker. That's obviously going to be the proof kind of coming into play, more than likely. So you get this really nice, you get that same, I'm going to comment first on that chocolate, coconut, the almond joy. It's there, and it is ramped up. Not in the ways I was hoping, but it's definitely ramped up. Let's dial it up a little bit. It's still there. But it's not like, I took something, kind of dipped my almond joy in it, and like, ooh, I got the little flavor, kind of like a flavored water or something. And then you would think next is like, I'm actually eating the candy bar. That's not what's happening here. It's just sort of more. It's like they, took that candy bar or whatever. Like you have like a flavored water, you put strawberries in it, to get like a flavored water, and then, take them out and you get strawberry water or whatever, cucumber. It's like that, but they did it for just a short time versus they let the cucumber soak in the water for a long time, right? It's kind of like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's sort of where that almond joy is speaking to me here. The open is, you get like this juicy tobacco. I don't know if that sounds bad or not, but it's kind of more of a wet tobacco versus like a sun-dried tobacco leaf or something to that effect. There's also this very nice subtle black pepper. I remember on the neck pour here, whether you believe that's a thing or not, getting more black pepper notes formerly, but it's definitely less now. That mid is really rich again with that milk chocolate, but you got some caramel mixing in this time. You've got some roasted coffee, maybe. Finish, you get some more of those oats, extending that finish. Maybe it's very soft kind of oats, less grainy, if you will, than on the small batch. And you got some young oak. It's a very nice long finish, a little bit more balanced. This one is all grains. You can taste those crazy, unique 6-grain mash bills all day on the small batch versus the Cask Strength. They're working and it's working well. It's producing a fine bourbon, but they're not as pronounced, I think, as when I had the small batch. It doesn't mean I like one necessarily better than the other. I do actually. I like the Cask Strength better than the small batch. I'm at like a 2.5 out of a 5.0 rating scale for the small batch, and on the Cask Strength, I'm thinking I'm going to give it like a 3.5 out of a 5.0, which is a very respectable rating. I can't imagine, what this would taste like, with, double the years. So when you look at like their bottle and bond at 100 proof, I imagine that's probably really good. I can't wait to see, because I've heard Seth Dettling remark on another channel that he is a fan of older age-stated bourbons, and so I might, one might speculate that we could see an older age-stated bourbon in the future for them. That being the goal of most distilleries, so probably not a huge leap there, but I bet they're going to do really well. It's just unique, and that's the thing. Bourbon is definitely a very hard thing to do something different in. They got, very regulated set of rules they got to follow to be bourbon. And then 95% of all bourbon is made in Kentucky. So what's that mean? It means a lot of bourbons taste the same. Minus an age date, maybe some proof, maybe a distillery. Yeah, you get some, really, ones that stand out every once in a while. But man, they're doing just fine at 2.5 years at 80 proof even in Alabama of all places. So again, I cannot wait to see what's in store for them in the future. I'm going to say y'all need to pick up both. If you can, I would pick up both because they're both two different experiences. This is really cool in the 6 grain thing. That's super cool. If you're really into bourbon, you really want to try something crazy different. This is great, and it's definitely something you can sip on at 80 proof all day. I think this is a very unique and fun thing. And the cash strength is just a really cool thing to see where this is like the big brother of using the same mash bill, everything else, to see how that kind of evolves and then where they might have potential in the future. So I would definitely recommend getting both if you can. But until then, cheers to Biggest Scamby Spirits, Dettling 1867, and you all for tuning in. Thanks, and hope to see y'all next time. Cheers.